Welcome to this brief demonstration of the Delphix self-service capability. We will focus on the application acceleration that is offered by the self-service feature. This brings data manipulation control into the hands of the testing team, empowering those employees by giving them autonomy over their test data management, and yet maintaining tight controls over the infrastructure for the database administrators. We're going to demonstrate this feature by showing a simplified representation of an application estate that in this case consists of an Oracle database-backed application running on Tomcat. We have an Oracle virtual database, a VDB, and a virtualized Tomcat application using vFiles. The database could just as easily have been any of our supported databases such as DB2, Sybase, SQL Server, or HANA, or any other data store that we could virtualize through vFiles. So let's take a quick look at the architecture of the demo setup. We're running the demo in Amazon Web Services, and we have a source environment that's on a virtual machine. We use an M4 large environment for that. We have a target environment also running on M4 large server, and the Delphix engine itself is running on an M4X extra large virtual machine. We could also run this in-house on VMware ESX or on your laptop VMware Fusion, or we could just as easily run it in the Azure cloud. So what do we have here? We've got the source environment, and in our scenario, we've ingested the Oracle database and the vFile, the files, the application files, into the Delphix platform, and these now exist as separate D sources, if you like, within Delphix. And Delphix is kept in sync with the production system through our SnapSync and LogSync technologies. So we've effectively got a rolling live archive of our production system from which we can provision virtual copies of those data sets. And in the background, we've created two virtual environments. So two virtual sets of copies of the database and the application. And we've put those into a developer, a dev data pod, and a QA data pod. And effectively, that data pod is just a set of data sets that make up a system. So you could have an Oracle database, SQL Server database, some flat files, some applications, and we would synchronize those and virtualize them all together and operate them on them all together. So at the moment, I'm not talked about privacy and masking. We can mask those environments as we create them, but in this instance, and for the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to show you how the virtualization works and how we can operate as a self-service user. So let's take a quick look at the application then. So we've got a QA application. So this is an Oracle database running on Tomcat. This is a Tomcat application. It's just a set of rows with a name, last name, and department. And at the moment, I've got a virtual copy of the application. So the production application looks very similar to the QA application. And the scenario we're going to use then is that of a data consumer. And let's log into our Delphix platform as the QA tester. And when we log in, we're presented with a list of data pods that we can use. In this case, as the QA, I've only got one application test environment that I'm working on. That's the QA environment. So if I click on the QA environment, what I'm going to suggest then is that I'm a test engineer about to start testing the QA application. So I'm going to use up that test data. And before we start to test, what I've done, I've set up a baseline, right? A bookmark. So I've clicked on our timeline. So you can see there's a timeline here. The star represents now. And I've actually created a bookmark. And that bookmark allows me to rewind to that point in time. So I've got a restore option here. So if I click on that bookmark, I can restore back to that point in time. So now if you can imagine, I might have a team of 10 testers. We've got an environment. I'm the test lead. I've set up the scenario. I've created the bookmark, and now we can start testing. So I can look at my QA application. You know, I've got a feature here to delete records within that application, and that record's been deleted. But it could be as through the process of testing that I break the environment. And so let me simulate actually breaking the QA environment. So I'll just go into SQL Developer here. I've got the QA environment. So let's make sure we're connected to that QA environment. And then I'll hit the drop table. So I've dropped the employee table. So I've created a catastrophic scenario so that now when I click on my QA environment, I've got an error. Now, in normal circumstances, that's a bit of a disaster for me. So if I've got 10 QA people working on this environment, the environment's broken, I need to get the environment fixed. But I also need to keep my guys testing. So normally that would involve a call to the support engineer, let them know exactly what the problems were. They're going to have to recreate the problem, get an engineer to fix the problem, and then we're ready to go forwards. But in the meantime, I also need to call the database administrator, and I've got to recover or restore this environment. And that could take some time. But let's see how we can shortcut that process with Delphix. So I go back into my data pod as the test lead engineer. I click on the current timeline, and what I'm going to do here is to create a bookmark. And this is a QA test error. I could put a more detailed description. I can set this to delete after a certain point in time, and I can add a tag where I can find it much more easily. In this instance, I'm just going to create a QA test error bookmark. And that's done almost instantly. So what that's done, it's taken a copy of the pointers to that data set at a point in time. And if we go in here, I can, if I select that bookmark, one of the other things I can do is actually share that bookmark. Because what I want to do, I want to share that information with my developer. So I've called the developer up. I've said we've got a problem, or I've raised a ticket. I could even put the ticket number on that bookmark. And now what I want to do is to get my test team working again. So what I can do is actually go back or rewind to this point in time. So I can restore my data set to that point in time. So if you recall, in the QA environment, we've got this error. I'm going to go into the system, and I'm going to say restore my data set back to the bookmark point in time, which I set before we started that testing. So whilst that's restoring, then we can start to take a look at the features of the data pod. So we've got the timeline, which we've described here. Within that timeline, I can look at the branches that I've got. So I've got different versions of the data set. And I can also see the bookmarks that I've created, and I can restore to any one of those bookmarks. If I go into the summary screen, that really shows me the number of operations that I've worked on during the week. And I can also see the source data sets. If I click on the sources, I get much more detail. In fact, this has come from the source database, tells me where the home are, gives me all the details. I can also see the history of what I've done with this data pod since its inception. Again, I've got another view of bookmarks that I've created. And an important capability here as well is to see how much data, how much storage space I'm using by these virtual data sets. And as you can see, you know, with the different versions that we've got, the new version uses very, very little storage. So we've got a massive storage chain. So the virtual database takes up a little storage. As we make changes to it, it grows. But when I create a copy, a different version, then it's very, very small. So let's go back to the timeline. That rewind operation or restore operation is completed. If I now go back into the QA application, and refresh that, I can actually see now that that's recovered and all of my testers can carry on working. In the meantime, let's have a look at the developer environment. So this developer has the dev environment. The dev environment's a little bit different. It's got a couple of extra columns. I don't know if you noticed that there. But as the developer, I've been told there's a problem with the system. So if I log on as a developer, again, I am presented with a number of data pods, the number of tests or development environments that I can work on. We've only got the employee application environment. So if I click on that data pod, what I can see here is, again, I've got the timeline, but also if I look at these branches, I can see that I'm in project A branch, right? So I'm actually working on a project. That project is clearly, working with a couple of extra columns. So the whole data set is quite different, even though it's from the same source database, but it's been modified for this project. We've now got this issue. So what I can do here is I can create a new branch that I'm going to work on, and I can call the branch is that, QA error 100. What I'm actually doing now is I quiesce the database. So if I go into the dev environment and try to refresh that, you'll see that the site isn't available anymore. So we've quiesced the application, we quiesced the database itself. The application's come back, but the database still isn't there, as you can see. So what we've done is we've quiesced that, and then we're bringing it back up. We've taken pointers, we've made a copy of the pointers to that point in time, and we're reinstantiating the database and the application as a new, unique copy or version of that data set. So whilst we're creating that branch, the next thing that we're actually going to do is we're going to go into the bookmarks. And as you can see, I've got no actual bookmarks in this developer environment, in this version of my dev environment. If I go into the overall bookmarks, I've got none of my own data sets. I haven't shared any, none of my own private bookmarks, I haven't shared any bookmarks. But if I click on the available tab, I can actually see the bookmarks that have been shared with me. Okay, so let's go back to the timeline. Let's check. So that's still running now. So we're still creating a new copy of this data set. And incidentally, the database can be as large as you like, and the amount of time taken isn't necessarily, isn't necessarily due to the size of the data set. Depends on the structure, but we can provision and restore 10 terabytes of data in under 10 minutes. So one of the largest data sets we use, which is a SQL Server, one of the largest SQL Server data sets, is about 70 terabytes, and I'm told that that can be provisioned in 15 minutes. Anyway, that job's finished now. So if we look at the branches, I've created a new branch which has got the QA error, and that's what I've called it. Of course, we've copied it from Project A, so it still looks like Project A. So if I go into the application now and refresh it, I still get these extra columns. So what we want to do is to now recover this database, this virtual database, back to this shared QA test error. So whenever I restore the system, I'm actually restoring my copy, my virtual database copy, back to the QA user's point in time. So if we go back to the timeline then, again, what I'm doing now, I'm doing a restore process to a bookmark. So that's going to take a couple of minutes for it to run. And again, going into the dev environment, the database has been quiesced, shut down, and then it's being rebuilt. At the moment, it's not available to us. Let's just look. So as we're waiting for this to complete, then we've got a number of other buttons on here. So we've got a stop button that allows us to stop the database, stop the environment running, so no one can work on it. The other thing that we can do as well is we can lock the environment. So if you can imagine lots of users have access to this data pod, what I can do is set a lock to the lead user. So when I lock the environment, only I am then able to access the environment and operate on it. Some of the other things that we can do, we've got the activate button. Obviously the activate button isn't available to us whilst the operations are running, but once that operation is completed, I can then activate back to project A. But now that's completed, if I go back into my dev environment and refresh it there, I can see that I've got a different error now, and this error is the same error that I had in the QA environment. And obviously as a developer, I need to fix that environment, and surprise, surprise, I do have a small job that I can run that will fix that environment. So if I run the fix script, oops, and go back to the dev environment and refresh that, as you can see, I've now resolved the QA error. But obviously I was already working on a project, but now I fixed that error. I can go back to the project, I can activate that project again. And again, all I'm doing now is dropping the data set, pulling the pointers from project A to that point in time, and refreshing that data set so I can get back to work on that application and that database, and go back to my original work. So let's just see what we've achieved. So our QA team have saved downtime of a broken environment. They recovered it without the need of a DBA. They did that themselves. Now, if you can imagine if it had been a large QA team, the fact that we were able to rewind and recover it ourselves could have saved lots of man hours and lots of cost. The other thing we were looking at, so this is the developer here. So now, as you can see, I've gone back to project A, and I can carry on working on my environment in the project that I was working on. So that means I can multitask on various environments as the needs dictate, as the as the projects become more important, or the bug fixes become important. And we're effectively hoteling the applications on a single target environment. So this is going to maximize the return on investment on our database and application licenses. So that's all I wanted to show you for now. The next demo will be around the masking capability. Thank you for listening.